Yes, there he goes. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
All right. So, guys, welcome to the Sunday UK call. It's 4 o'clock here in Thailand. Early or mid morning, late morning in the UK. And Dean was asking the question about basically, it was about traveling to Thailand. What was your question again, Dean?
Well, it wasn't really specifically. Well, I suppose you could. Well, we'll say Thailand, but does the weather and the vibe of Thailand and the what's in Thailand help with the practice?
Okay. Let's talk about the weather first. The weather is not ideal any place on the planet Earth in the sense of no matter where you are, you can complain. But it's good enough. It's tropical. People don't have chimneys here. A lot of people have air conditioning. But in fact, the Westerners are the ones who want and need the air conditioning. A lot of Thai, I found this really surprising years ago that many Thai people don't like aircon. Now my daughter, age 10, she wants it, but I'm not going to be supporting putting it in because I'm okay without air conditioning. Island conditioning is good enough. And so that takes care of the issue of the weather. But now let's talk about the vibes. In fact, it's worthy of a talk on its own is about the vibes. And the word vibes we have is the word that we use from vibrations in the sense of everything is in cycles. Everything is vibrating. That water, even when it's as still as it can possibly be still, it's still changing. It's vibrating. Molecules are bumping around. That's why we call it water, is because it's fluid. The reality is that everything is fluid on some level or another. Everything is changing, and it changes as in a frequency, and that we can call that a vibe. Now, some of the vibes don't mean much of anything to anybody, uh, and there's from the New Age, starting in the 1960s and 70s, they had the idea. This is where the word vibe actually got started. Is that sometimes there's vibrations in the air that we know that's there, but we can't pick up on it or define it. You could almost say that it's kind of subconscious. We could many times we call it also the sixth sense. Sometimes it's referred to as clairvoyance, in the sense of being able to know something without having any solid evidence that we have coming from the normal five senses. Another way that you could speak of it is that your human body is in the process of both transmitting and receiving data a lot, interchanging. That in fact, the human body is in the air, and that most of the contact that the human body has with air is on the outside surface of the skin as compared to the lungs. That ever how much money, interchange and life-giving support that we get from the lungs, there's a lot of breathing that's going on through the body, also our interchange with the air. And sometimes there is they've had a lot of words for it. One of them that comes to mind is ectoplasm. Has anybody ever heard of the word ectoplasm?
Yeah.
You guys
The
haven't,
Ghostbusters?
huh?
From Ghostbusters?
Say again, Drew.
From Ghostbusters.
I can't understand what you're saying.
The movie Ghostbusters from the 80s.
Ghostbusters. That's what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, they took a word ectoplasm out of the 19th century and turned it into a goo. We could also call ectoplasm in the sense that whenever someone is walking around, we are shedding skin, shedding molecules, that things fall off of the body, hair comes out and falls to the ground, etc., like that. This is why dogs are able to track someone, is that we leave the scent, but how we leave a scent is because of all of the bits and pieces of the body that's falling apart and falling off and laying around. That imagine, Marcus, that most of you is on the floor, or it was at one time, and somebody came in and swept you up with the vacuum cleaner and took you off and put you in the dustbin. One skin cell at a time. Well, maybe 1,000 or a million of them in a day or whatever like that, that we sweat. We put stuff out, okay? And that this is what has been referred to as the ectoplasm, that we leave stuff around and that it can be picked up on. Now, if there is sort of a national vibe, like let us say in Alabama, everybody has kind of, well, there's two groups of people. And in one side of the group, everybody has the same kind of thought pattern. So wherever those counties are, that ectoplasm is there, almost to the point that anybody who would move to one of the, like Macon, Georgia, or southern Alabama, they move to the coast from New York, and there's something in the air that turns them into Alabamans. They were green or blue, and when they get to Alabama and they spend there for a while, they become affected by the place. They pick up on the vibe. We do this kind of subconsciously. And Thailand has its own vibe. And if you stay here for a while, you can pick up on that vibe, but it comes in kind of naturally. Drew, do you understand what I'm talking about?
I haven't been to Thailand yet, but yeah, I do.
Okay, cities have a vibe.
I'll tell you where I did really feel this. So in the past couple of years, I've spent time in New Zealand, I've spent time in the UK in Cambridge, and I've spent time in the UK in London. Mm-hmm. And the vibe of all those three places is significantly different.
Precisely.
And the vibe in London is interesting and stimulating, but it's also rushed, and it's not particularly like I have time for you and you have time for me and we can enjoy each other's company. The vibe in Cambridge is like, during the day it's very busy, and then during at night it's kind of sleepy almost.
Mm-hmm.
And then the vibe in New Zealand and Wellington is like, we can all have fun together. We have time to have fun together. I care about you. You care about me. Work is just work. So,
all right.
Yeah, that's definitely
How about
like a big difference.
Yes, okay, so you understand it. Kat, you're here in Thailand. You're living at a Wat. How is the vibe different from you here in Thailand than it was in, Ireland?
I think in Thailand, you'll slowly start to become a bit more relaxed because there's not much to do. And I feel like if you're in a city for a while, even if I went to a city right now, I have a feeling I'll just start becoming restless like everyone else after probably a month or two. By that kind of, what you're saying by the subconscious vibes, you just start picking up. It's kind of like a sympathetic thing. You just started like slowly becoming like a magnet to or picking up on everyone else's vibes, and you just slowly get in that same energy, so to say. But here in Thailand, people, you can just find a whole lot of people staring at trees, like there's just nothing going on. They're so relaxed. It's such a different culture here.
Andrea, you had already mentioned that before Dean asked the question about the difference in the vibes. Like, for instance, Mumbai, or the way that I learned it was Bombay, has a completely different vibe than Goa.
Absolutely. And big cities in India are very difficult energetically. But at the same time, I feel in India, even in big cities where there's a lot of people, a lot of things happening, the the mental sort of association is not nearly as strong as it is in Western countries, and even Thailand to some extent. Like there's a lot going on, but at the same time, it's much lighter, right? Even with a lot of people there. But in certain aspects, of course, yeah, Thailand is, even in places like Bangkok, the culture is much more quiet and much more tranquil, externally as well as internally. So it's very different. But in India, apart from the small village where I'm at in the south of India, and places like Dharamshala in the Himalayas, can't really live anywhere else. Everything else is a bit too hectic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Dean, we're in the direction of answering your question. But you're the one, I think, that started it with the question about the vibe of Thailand, and I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that this is real, but it's hard to measure, and it winds up with something that's almost subconscious until we begin to pay attention to it. Like an example would be, if wherever you are, if you go into a building, what's the vibe of that building? Generally, because of the kind of building it is, you will know the vibe of that building before you even go in there. For instance, the vibe of a bank is completely different than the vibe of a soup kitchen.
I'm going to an embassy tomorrow. Guess what the vibe is going to be like there?
I know the vibe of embassy, and probably the vibe of embassies is kind of an uptightness that is akin to prison.
I have one question. How do you discern perception and vibes, like these sympathetic vibes and your own perception of things, you know?
Well, first off, let's go back to the sutras about it. There is actually a word for this, and it's called mudita. Has anybody heard the word mudita? Certainly we have. Right, it's one of the Brahma Viharas, along with metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. And that this mudita is actually when we begin to see and to recognize that we have effects upon people and they have effects upon us. Just like a clear example, in fact, his easy example is that you can place a well-tuned violin in a room, say on a cabinet or in its case open or whatever. People leave the room, and then a trumpet player will come in and play an A on his trumpet and then walk back out of the room, and the next person can walk into the room. They'll still hear that violin playing its A on the A string. Now, why is that? That's because of the vibrations that we have that we call noise or music. And the difference between noise and music is that music has a repetitive pattern in the sense of both frequency and tempo. And that frequencies and tempos together make a cadence. And that music is all about cadence, to where noise has no cadence, it's got no particular frequency, it's all over the place. And generally, busy places are noisy, to where quiet places have a different feel to them. And you could say then that every city has its own music, and a lot of noise is in that music. And every household has a kind of a musical quality to it. It's got a kind of a vibe that's all set from this sympathetic vibration. Now, the way that we can look at it in a practical kind of sense is that if when somebody's angry, they're having a vibe of anger. It also has an undertow or an undercurrent, let's call it a pedal note of fear. And this is the basis. And so the vibrations then of anger will distribute themselves right out. That in fact, when somebody's angry, what's their intention when they walk into the room that you're in and start saying angry words? What's their intention? Their intention is to get you angry also, to fall in tune with them and their anger. This happens on a psychological level, it happens on a mental level, and it happens almost on this spiritual level that we're talking about of a sympathetic vibration. That when somebody is angry, not only that, but a lot of ectoplasm, a lot of skin, and a lot of chemicals that are coming out of their body, out of their breathing, and filling the air. And now you're breathing the same air, that angry air. So it's naturally going to affect you, especially if all of this is happening subconsciously. But if you're aware of this stuff, you're aware that when people are angry and you're around their anger, that you have a choice. Are you going to be affected by that anger, or are you going to have and maintain and keep your own vibration? Can you do that? And the answer would be that if you can, then this is good practice to maintain your vibrations in the face of other vibrations. And the other side of the answer is if you can't, then leave those negative vibes. Get away from them. There are many places in the sutras, one of my favorite because it's a really strong point, is that the Buddha says if there is a war in a district, the monks should not stay in that district. They should leave that area. Also, if there is a famine or a flood or pestilence, disease, that kind of thing in an area, if there is a famine, there's no food, why should the monks hang around an area that's going to be precious, all the food that they have? They don't want to feed the monks either. So there's a very practical reason to get out of these areas, but it's also to get out of the vibe, to get away from.
There's another sutta as well. The point of the sutta is totally not about this, by the way. The point of the sutta is like the Buddha talking about the stages of his development and what you need to do kind of when you're at a particular point. It's like, well, how can you lean into the next point? But the setup to this is the Buddha he comes out during the start of the day and the monks are arguing about something. And the Buddha's like, monks, please resolve your difference and continue with the practice. And the monks are to the Buddha, back to him. They're saying like, no, we'll sort this out. We'll keep going. And the Buddha's like, second time, monks, please resolve this. And the monks are back to him like, no, we'll resolve this. And the Buddha's like, for the third time, monks, please resolve this. And the monks are like, no, we can settle this. We will keep arguing. And the Buddha's like, I'm off. See you guys. He goes to the forest. And while he's walking in the forest, he meets his cousin Anuruddha and two other friends who are practicing in the forest. And he first discusses, wait, you guys aren't arguing. How do you manage this? And you manage to not, you keep noble silence. You don't get into too much trouble. You manage to coordinate like getting food, cleaning the dishes, etc. And then they just describe their setup, which is like, we do the minimum amount of communication required to get the thing done, but not anymore so that we don't annoy each other. And then the Buddha says, you guys are doing great. Here's what you do. And the bit I remember from that sutta is, obviously they talk about, okay, first you got to like run, sit, breathe, and then there's lights and forms, and then there's the jhanas. And I'm at the lights and forms on a good day. So I need to revisit that sutta and remember what the Buddha said to do next when you have lights and forms.
As you were speaking, my mind was going through several suttas, and the answer, the number of that one, I don't remember, but I do remember that the statement that they made is that we are mixing like milk and water.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. To where the monks who were arguing with each other, they wanted to continue arguing because both sides or all three sides or whatever wanted something. That's the key, wanting something that we don't have, and that's what causes angers and arguments and whatnot like that. And the best way to deal with people who are arguing is to get away from them. Don't try to stop them arguing. You might want to mention that they're arguing, But then they'll start arguing with you about, no, they're not arguing. They're discussing, just like they did with the Buddha. And so this is an important
I have
point.
an analogy like I sometimes like to use for arguments. It's like there's a bunch of logs on fire, and maybe if you're really good and quick, what you can do is separate the logs with a stick, so that they just burn out kind of by themselves.
Exactly.
But more often than not, if you use a stick to try and separate the logs, the stick's going to catch fire, and now you just made the fire bigger.
Yes, exactly. That's a very good analogy, because what the log won't burn by itself. Think about that. The log doesn't burn all by itself. It needs help, basically, from other logs or from the stuff on the ground. They help it. The same thing is with anger, that people don't stay angry by themselves. They need to be around other people that's going to feed their burning. And it could be even the case that somebody got angry, really, really angry at something many, many years ago, and took off and went out into the woods or the forest and was living as a hermit for all of these years later. And then someone runs by him and starts to hear his story. And when they hear his story, he begins to get angry again. He hadn't thought about it for years, but now somebody's there. He's going to rub himself into bursting in flame again. That we keep our old grudges, and we can rub them against somebody else and burn and burst into flame again. But the point is that if you are about to set yourself on fire, can you see that happening? Can you see what vibes you have? What is the friction? I mean, you probably were in the same kind of grade that I was in when I was in the 7th grade. We learned about fire needing 3 things. It needs oxygen, it needs the fuel itself, the kindling, and it needs a spark. It needs something to get it hot, and then it'll reach the kindling temperature, and then it begins to burn as its own pile of sticks or wood. Okay? That same thing is true with human beings, that someone will spark you off, or you will spark off other people if they're dry and ready for it. But as we also kind of understand is that friendship is more like water to douse those fires, so that we can actually put out the fires if we in fact have the water, rather than having their anger boil off our water. We become all steamy and then hot, and now we're part of the fire. And so once we see that, we can recognize that many different societies have their various fuels, and they have their various sparks. Can you see those things in advance so that you do not get set on fire, do not get sparked? Well, guess what? We can, in fact, set ourselves on fire with our, let us say, hot thoughts. Our unwholesome thoughts will get us agitated to the point of getting out of bed and going to work. I mean, what a fire that is to get you out of bed to go to work. Must be pretty important. And yet we get set off so easily like that. It happens so often that we don't recognize that that's the kind of a fire that we have set off because of the rubbing that has to do with these vibrations. And so we can either learn to get into sync with the vibrations or get out of that vibration. And the place that we start with that is with anapanasati, is to start looking at our own vibrations, to start looking at our own thoughts. Now, one thing that we can make a point about is that our own thoughts, when I use the word thought, I have to define that Otherwise, people will understand it naturally then as discursive thoughts or talking to ourselves. But there's a whole lot of different kind of thoughts. An example of that would be being stung by a bee, and we notice that that bee is there, but we don't have to talk ourselves about it, that it hurts. And when we pay attention to the hurt, that's a kind of thinking about the hurt, but it's not discursive thought. It's paying attention to the sensations of the body. Another kind of thought would be a visual thought that you can actually, here's an interesting one. Do you know what the flag of the United States looks like? They call it the Star-Spangled Banner. Do you know what I mean? How do you know what I mean? It's because you've seen it before, right? But seeing it before doesn't mean anything, because you've seen a lot of things before that you don't remember. But the Star-Spangled Banner, this flag that I'm talking about, is that you've seen it, and when I say the word, you have a mental image. In fact, probably several of you have had a dozen different images of it. One is it's on the flagpole, another that it's waving, another the three-cornered flag that they give to the widow of the dead soldier. I mean, there's all kinds of different flags, and we have those various images. In fact, you probably got quite a large catalog of images of your mind of the flag. So these images can flash very, very fast. And sometimes things will flash through so fast that they don't even fully form an image. An example would be kind of like a color, that sometimes when we think of the Star-Spangled Banner or the American flag, we'll just see colors. It doesn't actually form itself into the shape of a flag. These things are very, very fast. Another example of that, in fact, I used this example with Cathal not long ago, that I want to clean the knife. And so when I'm cleaning it, notice which way the blade is. I'm cleaning it in a way that makes sure that my fingers don't get cut, but I didn't have to think about that. I just automatically turned that knife that direction. This is the kind of circuitry that we're talking about. I don't have to tell myself, oh, you have to turn the knife out so that you don't get cut with it. That happens automatic, well less than 1/10 of a second. So we have a lot of decisions that are built right in. This is what the Buddha talks about when they talk about the formations or the sankharas. These sankharas are like a kind of, let's say, software wiring that's a decisional process. And so we make judgments. The example of that is Anna was talking about the Holocaust. Well, the Holocaust was 75 years ago or 80 years ago. And here she is thinking about it, which means that she's burning herself, and that the Holocaust is bad is deeply, deeply wired. She doesn't even have to think about it. When I use the word Holocaust, you automatically think of, oh, it was bad. You don't take the Nazis' position of, hey, we're doing the world a favor by getting rid of all of this riffraff. You don't take that position. But some people did. Other people take the position, oh, it never happened. But then that wiring, that position that we take, gets built in so fast that we automatically will come up with answers. You could say, in fact, that we program these vibrations deep into the sankhara or deep into the mind, that in fact you could say that this is the wiring of perception itself, these sankharas that happen so fast. I don't have to tell myself that this or that is bad, these people are bad, or those people are bad. I don't have to say it. It's already built into the wiring. It goes really deep. We learn this kind of stuff at the age of 3 and 4 and 5. And another point is that we learned it so early and so fast is because we were already pre-programmed for that in our instincts, right down into the DNA. So the programming of which way that switch is going to flip is really deeply buried. And so we flip the DNA, or we flip a switch that is, so when the circuitry is in operation, these things happen really fast. This is why something can happen, and within 2 or 3 seconds, within maybe even 1 second, you're already angry. How does so much happen so quickly? The answer to it is that these sankharas are actually the program that we run when we perceive something, so that when we finish perceiving it, now we have a representation of an understanding. Now, this kind of understanding is actually, we could call it a consciousness itself. Just like this is what Western psychology thinks about is consciousness. But the Buddha has actually, and you can see that in reality, there's 2 kinds of consciousnesses. One kind of conscious is I see it with the eye. I hear it with the ear. I can smell it in the air. I can taste it. It touches me. I'm taking the body and making it a sensory input device. But what goes in is not just the sensory input. What also goes into the mix is this programming, or the wiring of how we're going to process this data, perceive it, so that it comes out with an outcome. It's sort of like in a movie set, the difference between the camera rolling and making pictures versus watching the projector roll and showing the movie. The movie that's the output is not the same as the actual camera images that were input. A whole lot of stuff happened on the cutting room floor, so to speak. And that cutting room floor stuff is this sankhara, or these very, very quick, deep, deep thoughts that we have that is actually part of the wiring.
So I have a question on this.
Yes, go ahead.
When I notice sankhara in my daily life, and I kind of reflect on a sankhara which has just arisen. And if I'm really good at it, I'm also reflecting on the reflection which has just arisen right after the sankhara, because that's also another sankhara. There's almost 2 things that can happen afterwards. I was going to say you can do, but you don't. They just happen afterwards, right? One is the automatic recognition that, oh, that's like, I didn't choose to think that thought. How strange, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that
thought was pre-programmed. It just kind of popped up. You didn't.
Yeah.
You
I
didn't
saw
order
it.
it.
And I was like,
it was delivered.
Yeah, and if anything, that's not the sort of. And then the other one is like, oh, that's an unskillful thought. I want to change it.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like 90% of the work, or 90% of the effectiveness, comes from just recognizing that, oh, that's just definitely not me, right? It's kind of like, but there's this weird thing that happens in some sense, that there's a thing, but there's also the buying into it that you're doing so much of the time. But when the buying into it is not there, it just feels very different. And then obviously, if you've not bought into it, it's actually a lot easier to change it, because you're like, well, I'm not bought into this. Maybe I should just be nicer about that person I'm judging for whatever it is, their weight,
yes,
or their way they dress, etc.
Right?
Exactly. But if you try and change that before you've if you try and change that while you're still buying into it, it's a lot of effort. It's not quite impossible, but it is a lot of effort.
You're making 2 major points here. One of them is that you're reestablishing the point that I'm making, in the sense that sometimes you don't like somebody. That's not a thought. It's not even a feeling. This is what we call a sankhara. It's part of the wiring. It may be because of the way that you're dressed. It may be you've never seen this person before, but you automatically either like them or not like them. How can such a complex decision-making process go on to where you come up with you either like somebody or don't like them? That happens so quickly. Then, in fact, this is what they mean by first impression. You've heard that phrase before, right? In other words, you can have first impression about somebody that happens within a split second, and then that's your attitude about them for a long, long time. It may take months or years, in fact, to get some real data in there about them because you've already chosen what you think about them. This is often also instinctual in the sense of unknown. We become, if there is something unknown, we become afraid. Why? Because that's built right into the DNA. When we were still critters, when we were still monkeys, if you saw something that you didn't know, your natural reaction to it is going to be trepidation and working slow. That winds up in politics under the expression of the devil, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Well, why is that? And why are you calling both devils when in fact we don't know that, other than we're already predisposed to be unhappy and against politicians in general? And we have these automatic assumptions that are buried deep. These automatic assumptions this way is what the Buddha calls attachments to rites, rules, and rituals, in the sense of, or the Pali word is sila bhatta paramasa, and that we make these decisions so quick. And often we don't even know why we make that decision. As an example would be that the pristine lady who is all dressed up walks out of her plantation after she's perfumed up and everything, and she walks out there where a laborer is. He hasn't had a bath in knows who long, and she takes a whiff of him, and she automatically rebels. It's not a fragrance that she's aware of, but she doesn't actually understand that she repels against this guy because she doesn't like the way that he smells, which is, again, part of this vibration that we're talking about. And so we pick up on other people's vibration that's different than what we know, and we automatically will reject it without any investigation at all. This is why the Buddha has that whole point about we have to investigate. But it's not the odors of that guy. We don't want to go smell his armpits for an investigation. What we want to do instead is investigate the mind as to why we make certain choices and decisions, why we have certain kinds of thoughts. These thoughts not only in the regard of discursive thoughts, where the woman turns and walks away like, I can't stand it. That's a verbal thought. But she didn't turn and walk away with those words at first. What happened instead was the mental process of I don't like him came up, and she was not even aware of it. And for that reason, she thinks that he is bad because she's repelled. But if she would look at her mind instead, she would recognize that's unfamiliar to me. I don't know what that is. My first reaction is repulsion, but maybe there's some musk in there, and I might, in fact, enjoy it. And neither one of these sides she's even aware of. All this stuff happens at a very fast level. And a lot of it, going back to what Dean's question was, these vibes that we get into, these countries or these cities or these plantations or the forest, they all have their own vibrations. And here we are going from place to place to place and are not even aware that when we change location, we're changing the vibrations. We're not aware of that. Why? Because we're not paying attention to it. But if you're practicing very well with Anapanasati, then you begin to be aware of these niggles, these sensations, these vibrations that we pick up on, and recognize that they have influences on our thoughts. However, once we see that, now we can choose to decide which influences we're going to have on our thoughts so that we can begin to control the way that we're thinking. rather than, and here's the second part of what Drew was talking about, is that most of the thoughts that we have are not even original. You're not thinking your thoughts, though we think that every thought that I have is my thought. No, it's not. You heard it someplace else before. You're a plagiarist. Your whole mind is nothing but plagiarized old material. And when we recognize that, we can say, hot dog, now I see that I'm just pre-programmed. I'm just repeating old stuff that I've heard someplace, possibly in childhood. And much of it is unwholesome. Why don't we now start changing it into the way that we want to, so that we can tell ourselves what we want to say to ourselves, so that we can feel the way that we want to feel, rather than feeling the way that we seemingly, excuse me, were pre-programmed to feel. That when we get angry, we just seem like get angry automatically, rather than recognize, oh no, there was a whole process that was going on there. And it always had this baseline of, oh, something happened that should not have happened. I judge here. My judgment is that it's either good or it's bad. And we go around judging good and bad and good and bad on a regular basis. Can you see yourself doing that? Making these automatic decisions, this is good and this is good and this is bad and this is bad and this is terrible and that's wonderful. And we go around making these judgments in an instant, a split second. Can we see that stuff? If we can see it, we can change it. We can change the way that people who are angry, we respond to them. We can take a hike, or we can give them a smile, we can give them a kiss. We have all kinds of options once we wake up. But if we don't wake up, then the natural thing that's going to happen is they get angry or get angry at us, or they get even angry at the bank. If he's angry at the bank, he wants you to be angry at the bank. If he's angry at you, he wants you to be angry at him. Have you ever gone through that sequence? Yeah, look at that. We all do it. So when it happens to us, we do it out of habit, out of the sankara that's based upon, oh, he's not supposed to be angry at me. Well, how long did we have to think about he's not supposed to be angry at me before we got angry? We didn't even have to have the thought, oh, he should not be angry at me. That kind of thought is pre-programmed. We didn't need words, oh, he should not be angry at me. We got angry before we even had time to say it. That's how fast the mind is. So are you going to be there to catch that mind, or how fast it is, so that you can deflect it and say, oh, he's angry, but I'm not. Can you take charge? I mean, maybe you do want to get angry. How many of you here actually like to get angry? Well, when you were kids, honestly, you like to get angry. Yeah, normal people, they like to get angry. If they didn't like to get angry, why would they get angry? Okay, here's the reason why people like to get angry is because their only option is fear. And so they cover the fear with anger, because anger makes us feel powerful. You've heard of the expression from science of fight or flight. We always think that, hey, man, let's fight this one out. Let's argue this out. Let's finish this. Let's not take the flight. And the whole teaching of the Buddha is, yeah, let's take the flight. Let's just walk away. Let's recognize that this is a dangerous situation, and we don't have to fix it to where it's not dangerous. We can just walk away from it. But all of this happens in the mind very, very fast. And so this is why it's good to actually train. Kat, your microphone is very noisy. There you go. So these vibes then come in and affect us. When people first arrive, if they haven't never been to a big city, when they come to a city for the first time, what is normally the vibe? They feel overwhelmed. They feel afraid, because the vibrations of the city itself is very noisy, not musical at all, not pleasant to the ears at all. And so people naturally become afraid. And so they feel like that they have to protect themselves. And so what they do is they wind up over a short period of time, get angry, just like the angry vibe of the city. Can you maintain your peace and quiet inside in the face of all of these angry vibes that happen? If you can, that's good practice. If you can't, then the right thing to do is to take a hike, to get away from it. This is true on a city level. It is true on a, let us say, a group of people level. It's on a political party level. It's at a church congregation level, and it's on the level of two people. It's always that you're interacting with your environment. Cadam today was saying that there were people that has watched that were talking about parallel universes. Have you ever heard of a parallel universe or parallel? Well, guess what? Of course, we live in a parallel universe. The actual real world, and then our response or our understanding of it. And oftentimes it's not actually parallel. We don't really keep up with reality. Sometimes we're in the past, sometimes we're ahead of the game, sometimes we're off base, off track. But we call it a parallel universe. The only thing that's parallel about it is the fact that it's all happening right now. So there are parallel universes. In fact, have you ever heard of a multiverse? That's easy. You put two people in the room and you've got three realities. You put four people in the room and you've got five realities. Why is that? It's because there is a baseline real reality that everybody can touch, taste, smell, hear, all of that. And then the next level of reality is what we do with it. And we often do it really fast. Rather than paying attention to what the input actually is, and listening and hearing and looking and staying in sensory awareness, we go off into world making, into creating the reality that we're in. And we create it in a way according to our liking, and that liking and not liking is always based upon that sankhara, those choices that we programmed in so many years ago that happened so fast. So the actual practice then of anapanasati is to sit alone and recognize that here you are creating stuff. That even if there's nobody there, still the floor, the ceiling, the room, the bed, wherever you are, is one reality, and then what you're doing with it is another reality. And a lot of the time, we're not even paying attention to what's real. We're paying attention to a reality that's in our mind, like an argument that we just had somebody, or I'm going to teach him, or maybe we're writing a book in our mind, laying in bed. Instead of just enjoy being in bed, here we are turmoiling on.
Oh, I was doing that last night. Thankfully, though, my books have become less angry.
That's good.
They're just shiny, interesting now, which I'm working on.
Mm-hmm. Well, remember that everything about the teaching of the Buddha is a middle path. And when I'm talking about one extreme, people think about the only option is the opposite extreme. So when I'm saying while you're in bed, pay attention to the reality that here you are in bed with the covers and it's this temperature and it's this feeling, etc., like that, being in total reality, the mind will drift away. It's going to go to the book that we're writing. It's going to go to the argument with Aunt Susie. It's going to go with all the work that we have planned. That will go immediately back into the past and future. Well, not immediately. Maybe we can spend maybe 30 seconds in Anapanasati and then off the mind goes. Goenka talks about that when he says the phrase of, when the mind wanders away from the breath, never mind, start again. Just come back to reality. But the point is that off we went. Now, can we catch that off we went? Do you know when the mind is wandering that it's wandering? Do you know that if you're being judgmental, because sometimes it's necessary to be judgmental. If you are judgmental, do you know you're being judgmental? Can you be effective at being judgmental? Or are you just being judgmental out of a habit and you're not even aware of it? And so somebody says, oh, you're being judgmental. You say, oh, no, I'm not. I'm not being judgmental. Rather than recognize reality, hey, you've been caught. Do you know what you're doing? This is the practice of Anapanasati. So back to the Dean, back to your point about the vibes of Thailand. Yes, it's actually quite beneficial to be in the vibes of a place that is beneficial to the Dhamma. And it's also not beneficial to be in places that have vibes that are not beneficial to the Dhamma. We can actually say that in one word and sum it up to be, this is what Sangha really is. Sangha is learning to deal happily with the vibrations of the community that you're in, including being able to choose good communities with good vibrations to be in.
It's not just 50% of the path.
It's the whole path, exactly right. To keep your mind focused on the fact that here you are in this field, this vibrational field, this field, you're either going to make friends with it or you're going to make enemies with it. And we're in the habit of making enemies with it. And so that's our natural pretext, is to be unfamiliar and being afraid of the unfamiliar. And let it be okay that we don't know. That in fact, that's the last fetter. The 10th fetter is ignorance. How do you deal with ignorance? Because you're going to remain ignorant. Yeah, you can be enlightened to boot. You can be nibbana up the nose. But that doesn't mean you know everything. It means that you know enough to be safe, secure, comfortable, happy, secure, satisfied. And that's all we need. But you're not going to know everything. But we creatures, us human creatures, we want to know. We want to know everything. That in fact, I imagine that it started something like this. That's a little, this kid in such primitive times that the language is primitive. And he points up. And Uncle Fred looks at the kid who's pointing up, and he invents a story about, oh, you're pointing at that star, and that star means something. It's the Star of the East. Or it's the Star of David, or it's a cluster of Orion, or maybe it's the Big Dipper. And then he tells more stories about the bear, tells more stories about the water carrier, Sagittarius, and all of that. And with a few centuries of that kid and kids like him repeating those stories, you've got a religion. And it was all founded in ignorance, and people don't like being ignorant. I don't know what's going on up there. There's quite a show in the sky at night, but I don't have a clue about what it is. But people don't like to be that way. Oh, no. I mean, in modern times, they're even doing Hubble's and James Webb telescopes and all kinds of stuff because they can't stand the fact that they don't know what's out there. And a good Buddhist kid is say, I don't care. Don't bother me. It's all right that I don't know. I could still be happy and not know. And so this whole point that I'm making right now about wanting to know, that's part of that programming. How long do you have to say, oh, I wonder what that star is about, and talk to ourselves before curiosity arises? No, the curiosity just pops right up. Why? Andre, good to see you. Hope to see you again soon. I was just about to finish up with all of this, with these vibrations that we don't know happen. and this ignorance that we don't know, and all of this stuff that happens so fast that we're not paying attention to, and how we can start looking and recognizing that we have a choice. We don't have to be confused because we don't know. We can be happy that we don't know. Hey, I don't know that. Who's going to win the 24 election? I don't know. Do I care? No. Because I can't do anything about it. Anything that I could do about it, I'd probably get arrested for doing it. And so I shan't. And besides, it's so far away. And I don't like to fly. My arms get tired. And so I'll just have to leave the American government to do what it's going to do. And so I don't care what it does. Not my problem. So this is beginning the way that we have to understand that we're going to remain ignorant about everything. So why do we keep taking the automatic position of, I don't like it when I don't know?
Just to ask you about the other thing, and obviously if you can't do anything about it, you drop it. But if you can do something about it, you do it joyfully, I assume, right?
But if you're going to do something, do it joyfully.
Yeah, there you go.
Like change that guy from being angry to being happy with you. The first thing to do is to start agreeing with everything he says. Make friends with him. And then you can point out, hey, do you really feel good about being angry? So you can actually talk people out of being angry. Easy enough, but it's easier for them to talk you into being angry. Unless you're wise, unless you're watching what's going on. So this is where we come back to practicing again. We have to practice recognizing that we go off the rails all by ourselves. We don't need to get pushed. And when we can get back on track and get back on the rails all by ourselves in our own mind, then those people out there can't push us around so much anymore. And so this whole point that Kat was making a while ago is about friendship is the entire practice. And it comes in two stages. One is to make friends with oneself on the inside by stop judging yourself. Stop criticizing yourself and start enjoying your life. And once you're able to do that, once you've made friends with yourself on the inside, then it's actually easy to make friends with other people on the outside. But that means that we're rewiring that automatic stuff. That we're reprogramming the mind down at a very deep level, because at those levels, things happen really fast. This is at the circuitry level, not at the printer level. I'm old school, by the way. The printing is slow. The processing is fast. Okay?
Still slow these days compared to that. It's gotten even worse because the processing got really fast, but the printing hasn't got nearly as fast.
Actually, possibly the fastest printer that ever existed, IBM built in the 1960s. It was called the 1401K, and basically it was a chain printer that had a long chain that had very many hundreds of letters that flew by at a very fast rate. And it was programmed so that there were many different versions of the same alphabet spread around this thing, and the computer inside the machine knew that when a letter was going to be printed here, that when it was getting close, this is when we fire the hammer, so that at the time the letter comes up, the hammer will strike. This thing printed at 600 lines a second. No, was it? It couldn't have been. 600 lines a minute. Sorry, they didn't do things in seconds back then. 600 lines a minute. Okay? And also that it sped paper so fast that if you didn't have the right sequence for it, it would spit paper out way across the room at high speed. You could empty a box of paper in, like 5 or 10 seconds with these printers. Guess what? Those things are so expensive, nobody has them anymore. This was in the old days when everything was done on paper, checks. This was the machine that the United States government would use to write Social Security checks. And it would spit them out so fast, like 100, maybe 200 checks a minute. Guess what? They send that to the account by the computer so fast they don't write checks anymore. And so we don't print. But anyway, the whole point is that an action is like the printer. That one of the major teachings of the Buddha, in fact, we'll end with this, is that the mind is the forerunner to everything. You do not take an action unless you thought about it, just like that printer does not print a line of text until the computer has computed what's going to be on that line of text and then send it to the printer. The mind is the forerunner to everything. If you realize that, you realize the Dhamma. If you realize that the mind is the forerunner, then the mind that has the dukkha, if you can change that dukkha to dukkha nirodha right now, then you're not going to take the action that causes more dukkha. You're going to stop. But you need to learn how to do that really fast, because that that printing just comes right out of the mouth unless we're watching for it. This is why the Buddha talks about it in the sense of stop. Shut your mouth. In fact, that's an actual phrase that I heard from Achan Po one time. Shut your mouth. Don't talk. Don't criticize, especially don't criticize other monks. Don't talk. Shut up. Or in his case, he says, shut your mouth. Probably the best lesson I ever got in my whole life. I should remember it more often. Can you remember that? Can you remember to shut your mouth? Because otherwise stuff's going to spill out so fast. Why? Because it processed so fast. But if we can shut our mouth, then we can review that processing, make some changes to that program, and come up with something more wholesome to say. So the mind is the forerunner for everything, but it is influenced. How the mind actually works is with this sanskara, this programming that we have, that if we're not wise, we're going to come up with bad processing because we've got bad programming. We've got neural circuits in there that fire instantly. I don't like it. And it fires so fast that I don't like it takes, 100 times longer than the actual reaction. I don't like it. So can you be fast also? Can you start watching your mind in its operation? This is, in fact, what Paticca Samuppada, really the teaching is. This whole talk that I've had is nothing but Paticca Samuppada. Can you watch these things that are happening inside the mind so that you can change it? And the way to do that is by practicing having wholesome thoughts. Rewire that. It's almost like the human being is AI. It has to be programmed. You have to see those, the machine has to see those images over and over and over again before it begins to get the wiring right. It took AI a long time to recognize cats. Had to see a lot of cats, okay? In that regard, that means that we have to see a lot of Dhamma before we begin to get programmed for Dhamma. So there's the whole practice, guys. You got to program your mind. Reprogram it for the wholesome, because you've got all these neurons in there that are programmed with a bunch of crap that you learned from the past. And almost all the thoughts that you wind up having are not even yours. They're just remembered old thoughts. So do you want to live your life with your old stuff, or do you want to make something new? Your choice. Practice having wholesome thoughts one after another, and pretty soon you'll begin to recognize all that stuff that's affecting you, all those vibes, all of that noise that's coming through the air, all of that stench, all that ectoplasm, all that stuff that influences us at a subconscious level. You can begin to pay attention, to wake up to that so that it doesn't affect you, that you can be what you want to be rather than that conglomerate of gunk that you breathe in. Does anybody have any questions about this? This is kind of fun. I love it. Create my own vibes right here. Dean, are you there? Yes. Okay. So your original question was about Thailand, and we wind up talking about vibes instead. But Thailand's got good vibes, better than most. Cat's in a good place where he's got really good vibes. In fact, he's headed up to here with good vibes. He wants to go get good vibes someplace else now. I'm just teasing. Anyway, Marcus, what do you think?
Yeah, it's good stuff. Especially also, I like the part about the anger reactions and how it's actually kind of anger is kind of a reaction to fear and powerlessness. Or in other words, we don't like that we are not able to affect something. And so we feel powerless, feel hurt, we don't like it, and then we get angry because we want to regain control or to regain power.
Have to
And
get
of
that
course, the
power back.
easiest, yeah, and of course, the easiest way to feel powerful in such states is being destructive, not constructive. So that's why anger is a dangerous thing.
Yes, almost everything that any human ever invented or ever made has gotten broken by some other human being that was angry. This is what war is all about. And what do we do after war? We got to go rebuild. So, Kat, do you have anything to say? It's been a good day. Hey,
Dhammarato,
yes. Go ahead, Dean.
the reason I actually asked this question is because when I was speaking to Cottle, he told me since he got to Thailand, Jhana was easy. So I was thinking, is it the weather, the vibes, the relaxation, all these factors at play that help and influence it easier to get into Jhana? So that was the reason
It's actually, there's two levels of it. One is the level of Thailand in general has that kind of a vibe. And then on top of that, he's in a Wat, which has its own vibe.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And the vibe of the Wat is pretty empty.
Yeah, it's mainly being in a Wat. Mainly being in a Wat, Dean. But Thailand is like the
Go on.
Thailand is like the first sense of how vibrations of environment can help you a lot. Thailand is just so different than Ireland. It's so different than Ireland. And being in a Wat, yes, it's like a totally different experience. Like it's just too hard to describe. I can't describe it.
I can imagine just getting good day after good day after good day of meditation, where in Ireland you can't get that, especially when you have kids and family and work and college and the whole fucking shebang.
Right. This is because for Westerners like yourself, the lay people, they need to take time out intentionally. Now, historically, that's been an hour a day. But most people can't even sit for an hour a day without the mind going and the mind goes right back into the world. The whole point then is a better practice is taking it into very short pieces, like 5 or 10 minutes. And that way you can intentionally say for the next 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to intentionally stay where I am. I'm going to have the mind that is in the room that I'm in. To not let the mind go wander away to Ireland or to Thailand or to the moon or to Washington, D.C., or wherever it kind of goes, and keep it here. Can you think about what's happening right here, right now?
I can.
And when you do, you can have that thought, a hot dog, I can do this. I can control the mind to keep it here, to keep it watching the breath, to keep it in the senses that we have, rather than having the mind get triggered by something and speed off in a high-speed motorcycle of the mind. I mean, how long does it take you to get to Delhi? How long does it take you to get to Saturn and back? That's how vast the mind is. All I have to do is mention Saturn, and all of a sudden you've got images of Saturn in the mind, rings and all. That's how fast the mind is. These images pop in very, very quickly, and the underlying programming that we're talking about is even faster than that. But if we start slowly to have new thoughts, new thoughts, new thoughts, then the new neurons that are being born will be programmed differently than the old neurons that are dying out. And pretty soon we can program our lives into a happy musical, rather than having such a noisy life that we picked up from the bad vibrations of the city that we lived in and the parents that we had. And let that program be. You are not who you thought you were, and you are not what you're supposed to be. But if anything, who you are is a moving target. And you can move that target any way you want to, if you start practicing to move the target. Otherwise, the program is just going to keep coming up with the same old crap, and you're going to begin to think that you are your programming. No, you're not. This laptop does not have to run Windows. It can run Linux too. So can you. You do not have to run the Windows of your mind. You can program it into Linux. You can do that.
I feel like it seems jhana can be really difficult in a normal life because you're so lost in the senses, you know. And Ireland is just like any other Western country. It's just full of noise.
Full
So
of
when you come
noise.
to a wat, and I feel like it's almost a natural result. You can easily go into jhana because the sensual sense of playing with your senses or being driven by craving is so low that it's like, oh well, there's nothing to do, and it just very naturally happens because there's nothing
How
to do.
long were you at the Wat? How long have you been at the Wat? And how long were you
Is
like
it counted
interested
in
before?
months?
I forgot.
Okay, months. Okay, that's
You've
fine.
done
Then.
visa
August.
twice, so we're talking about less than 6 months.
Okay, yeah.
No, not nowhere near 6 months. Maybe 2.5 months, 3 months.
Okay. No, I've been on like the longest retreat I've been on was a month, and didn't get. Maybe I was in the ballpark, but it wasn't quite working. So I'm gonna try go longer next time.
Mm-hmm. Well, the point is that even though the vibe of Thailand has the vibe of Thailand, the vibe of a Wat is the vibe of a Wat. And everyone should go spend some time in a Wat, not necessarily in a retreat, a long retreat. That's very Western and it's got its own vibes.
Yeah.
But Wat life is different. That in fact, in those retreats, those long retreats, you're supposed to do something. You're supposed to work. You're supposed to meditate. You're supposed to sit there and figure out things, right? And in Wat, you're just there to hang out and begin to recognize that, hey, hanging out is a lot of work when I do it the way that I used to do it. And if I learned how to do it correctly, it's easy. It's so easy.
Yeah.
So yes, the answer to that, after all of this hour and 15 minutes of talking, there is something about a Wat and they are not all in Thailand. That wherever you are, there's probably a Wat close enough by that you should go and pick up the vibe,
I
which
would
is
go to
nothing much.
Dhammarato. You know,
But
Dhammarato is really nice walk. I think.
Yeah, I've been. That's a discussion for another time. I like it, but I like other places more. If you really want the kind of vibe that I think you're after, I spoke to an abbot of another Wat who was at Amaravati for 15 years, and then he was like, I liked it elsewhere.
Yeah, it's got its own noise, doesn't it? It's a whole lot
it's
better than society, but Amaravati's got its own vibe.
Yeah. There's a Wat in New Zealand that's got that's a good vibe right there. There's a
lot of good Wats that have a lot of good vibes.
Yeah, so hopefully sometime next year I mean, I'm already on good terms with the abbot. He said, you're welcome to come back. So as long as he remembers me, I'll be back there as soon as I can.
That's exactly the way that I felt when I first met Achan Samedo. He had just opened Dhammarato. This was 1985.
Yeah.
And he invited me, and I went.
Yeah.
But back in the old days, there's also some stories about the Achan Chah's monasteries that he had built in Thailand and then in the West had to go through a process of de-Americanizing or de-Europeizing or de-Westernizing the place so that it would get the vibe that is easy enough to find in Thailand. Westerners, they don't know how to make good vibes in the beginning. It took Samedo, 20 years to get Amaravati to get a good vibe.
I don't know if that's still the case, but
it's not even the same anymore, right? It's going to go around. But I tell you what, Amaravati is better than not any Wat at all.
That's true. That's true.
That's
true.
Very
it's a good backup to have. It's a nice, good backup to have.
Mm-hmm.
Does Amaravati, do they do retreats, or is it just going and staying and meditate yourself?
I think
it's not for meditation. Please understand that the Dhamma of the Buddha is not about meditation. That's a very Western mentality. It's not about meditation and cogitation and figuring things out and looking at dukkha until you get sick of it and go into a long, dark night of the soul. No, it's about wherever you are, whatever you're doing, look at what you're doing. Pay attention to the thoughts that bring those doings. Remember, the mind is the forerunner. So don't think that all of the practice of the Wat. In fact, how many hours a day do you practice formal meditation, Kat?
Not much. It's very. Ajahn Maitri is very, very. He emphasizes
like me, huh?
He does not like meditation. Stop meditating. He even confronted me and said I was too attached to my sitting samadhi. Stop sitting. He said, stop sitting. He was very focused on sati, always right now. Look now all the time, wherever you are in the Wat, and get involved and do something. But the sitting is like maybe an hour a day. But chanting more chanting, maybe 2-3 hours.
But that's mental training. You begin to see that yourself, haven't you? Remember,
Yeah,
I'm the one who had to write a book on chanting to begin to even like it. Westerners don't like it. It sounds so much like church music. But it's a mental training. That chanting is highly beneficial. That in fact 20 minutes or 30 minutes of chanting followed by 20 minutes of meditation or sitting will bring you into jhana just like that. To where 4 or 5 hours of just sitting, nah. And why is that? Because when you're chanting, especially if you've got the text and you're listening to what the other monks are saying, you're paying attention to something that's really wholesome. You've got the mind focused on something wholesome. And every time the mind wanders away, the next word is said, and you come right back. I'm back into the chanting, right? You have to pay attention over and over and over again. So chanting is actually more valuable in many respects than meditation is. But it takes a balance. All chanting all the time makes you a Mahasamsak.
So
And he was,
Dhammarato, if someone like myself was going to Amaravati, because it's a lot closer, like, and I'm saving for a wedding, so I don't know will I make it to you in January, like I was hoping to. But what would you recommend? Go and make friends.
I would highly recommend Amravati.
But would you recommend? What would you recommend for me when I go there? Make friends.
Yeah. Look at what's
Stay there.
happening. Make friends.
You
Don't
can just
show
email
off.
them and
Don't
say,
try to prove what a good meditator you are. Because everybody else who comes there, they want to do that. Oh, no, your job is to fit in, to smile, to make friends with the monks, to meet the abbot,
And can you just
tell them how
approach?
much fun you're having here, that kind of stuff.
And is it okay to approach an abbot or the other monks and say hello? My
It's
name is Steve.
absolutely part of the protocol. This is not the United States Army to where the grunt can't go to the general. Oh no, when in fact the style is that any time that a monk goes to visit another Wat, he is absolutely obligated to go present himself to the abbot. And if the abbot is not there and he stays at the Wat, he introduces himself to the sub abbot or the acting abbot, and then the first thing that happens when the real abbot gets back is he introduces himself to the real abbot. That in fact, this is actually part of the education that I got. I was in Phnom Penh in Cambodia there with a trip. It was a very, very interesting trip with all of the Cambodian people from the U.S. There was about 30 of us. And I was one of 5 or 6 monks that were on that expedition. So here I am in Phnom Penh, and this young monk that I've never seen before comes up all excited because he's never seen I mean, I was a giant compared to him. Big guy. And so he invited me to take me back to his Wat, which just happened to have been the most important Wat in Cambodia. It was the head Wat in Phnom Penh. And there he took me to his quarters, and a lot of the monks there were very interested. So I had like 10 or 15 people there, monks, all of them, young monks. And down the hall came one of the old monks, and he took a look at what was going on. He saw me and he says, "Come with me." And he immediately took me to the abbot of the Wat, who happened to have been the Samdet Sangharaj of Cambodia. So I had an audience. I stayed a long time with him, but I was summoned because I did not take the correct protocol. I went to the dorm with this young monk, and I should have said, I got to go see the abbot. So that's the answer to that question, Dean. It's not, oh, should I go talk to him? No, it's necessary that you go. It's part of the protocol. You've got to go to the abbot. You got to go really, really early. Like within the first maybe 2 or 3 seconds of arrival, you ask, where's the abbot? I'm here to see the abbot. That's the way to start off. Now, there's a second point, and that is that the abbot really doesn't run the place. This is all formalities and protocol. Well, who runs the place? The old ladies run the place. So you need to also go introduce yourself to the old ladies at the Wat. Pay respect to them too.
I remember you taught me how important that was when I was going to the Wat in Mitchelstown here. But there was only one monk there and he didn't speak much English. But you said it's the women at the Wat is who you really get to need to know.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Because it's the women who build these Wats in the West.
I know, look, I hear all that what you're saying, but the reason I asked about do Amaravati do retreats is because I'd like to experience a retreat as well, Dhammarato. You know what I mean?
Glutton for punishment. I know your kind. Take it from someone who has actually been in more than 30 retreats and led more than a dozen or two. They are not Western Buddhism, and they are not what they're cracked up to be. And most importantly, they are not what happens in a Wat. You have, Kath, you've been to both the Deep of a One, the retreat, and you've also been into the Wat. And you know that they're not the same.
No.
That those retreats are full of vibes of tender young things and tough Russians and all kinds of ordinary people bringing all of their ordinary worldly vibes into that retreat. I do not recommend people go and hang out with other people who are in worse shape mentally than you are. However, they do have their benefit, but that benefit can be gained by going into a Wat and sitting down and watching the show. Remember that Western retreats are all about working at something, and the whole point of Western or of actual teaching of the Buddha is to stop working so hard. He says, go to the forest, go to the foot of a tree, go to an empty hut, go to a pile of straw, and sit down with the back erect and bring mindfulness or sati to the fore, which means start watching what you're doing. He did not say, oh, sign up for an expensive retreat, waltz into the meditation hall, and pretend that you're there all alone. That's what noble silence is telling yourself a lie, oh, I'm on my own here, to where in fact you are subjecting yourself to a huge amount of vibrations. Young things with kneecaps and all. Sometimes those kneecaps get shown right out in public. And when that's all you've got to look at, wow, kneecaps. And that's what happens at Watts. I mean, at meditation retreats. They've even got the story about the Vipassana romance. So he sees that kneecap on day one, and he says, kneecap day two, kneecap day three, kneecap. And then at the end of the retreat, it says, I got to go talk to those kneecaps. Guess what? She already left. And he had all of these thoughts about, oh, these kneecaps are going to be interested in me. I got kneecaps too. Okay? So be careful about retreats. What you need to do is what the retreats are saying that they're going to do, and people fail at getting out of the retreat why they went to the retreat. So if you're going to go do the retreat, get out of that retreat what you went there to get. And that is to be able to manage those vibes, sit there and do nothing, shut your mouth, shut your eyes, stop looking at kneecaps, stop thinking about kneecaps, and start paying attention to how nice it is that you don't have to think about kneecaps. I hope you guys get my drift here.
We do, anyway. But anyway, thanks very much, Dhammarato. And I'll speak to you again, okay?
All right, we'll talk about it later, Dean, if you want to. Okay. But the vibe of a Wat is not the vibe of a retreat. See that. Notice that. Recognize that there are differences and that there are benefits for both. So I am never going to say don't do a retreat. Just like I would never say don't go to Amaravati. Oh no, if you're thinking about a Wat and that's the only one you know, you hop, skip, and jump right over there.
Yeah, well, before I go, I'll be in touch with you again anyway for some more advice.
Okay. Yeah? I can handle that. Sure. Marcus, thank you so much for joining. I've really enjoyed your smile. And we'll see you too, Kat.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.